The argument began with a clipboard and ended with a truth no one expected. She demanded a land survey, confident it would finally silence him forever. Mark had lived peacefully in his modest home for years, rarely speaking to neighbors, never causing trouble. But the HOA president, Karen, decided his fence sat too close to her property. She accused him of stealing land, blocking views, and ignoring community rules. Her tone was sharp, public, and humiliating. Emails followed. Notices appeared. Neighbors watched from windows as she promised consequences. Mark didn't argue. He simply agreed to the survey. Karen smiled when she heard that. She believed proof was coming, and it would be hers. She bragged openly that once the survey lines were drawn, Mark would be forced to move his fence and apologize. She even hinted at fines and legal action, enjoying the attention. What she didn't know was that Mark still had the original boundary records from when the land was divided decades ago. Papers his father saved. Papers no one else remembered. As the survey date approached, Karen felt victorious. Mark felt calm. Because the truth was already measured. And it was about to redraw far more than lines in the dirt. The surveyors arrived early, their equipment quiet but precise. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with satisfaction. She pointed often, correcting them, confident she already knew the outcome. Mark stayed back, silent, letting the process unfold. The neighborhood buzzed with curiosity as colored flags slowly appeared in the ground. Hours passed. Then the surveyor paused. He checked the map again. Then again. His expression shifted. Another surveyor joined him. Karen's smile tightened. She stepped closer, demanding an update. The lead surveyor finally spoke, carefully, professionally. The boundary line didn't move toward Mark's fence. It moved toward her house. Confusion spread. Measurements were repeated. Equipment recalibrated. The results stayed the same. Half of Karen's house, including her garage and patio, sat on Mark's property. The accusation reversed itself in a single sentence. Karen laughed nervously, calling it impossible. She accused the surveyors of incompetence. But the markers told a silent story no argument could erase. Neighbors whispered. Phones came out. Mark said nothing. He didn't need to. As the sun lowered, the surveyors packed up, leaving flags behind like warnings. Karen stood frozen, staring at her own home, now unfamiliar. The land she claimed wasn't hers. And the consequences were just beginning to surface. By evening, the news had spread through the entire HOA. The same neighbors who watched Mark with suspicion now looked at Karen differently. She called emergency meetings, insisting the survey was wrong. But the records backed it up. Deeds. Maps. Tax filings. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Her house crossed a line that had never belonged to her. Mark was calm through it all. He answered questions politely, showing copies of documents his family kept for generations. The HOA board grew nervous. Lawyers were contacted. Silence replaced authority. Karen's confidence cracked with every passing hour. The next morning, an official notice arrived. Karen was instructed to resolve the encroachment immediately. Options were limited. Purchase the land. Modify the structure. Or face legal action. None of them preserved her pride. She avoided eye contact, skipped meetings, and stopped sending emails. The woman who once demanded obedience now whispered excuses. Mark didn't celebrate. He simply reclaimed what was always his, standing by the fence that started it all. Mark reflected on how quickly power can shift when truth is measured honestly. Karen wanted a survey to prove dominance. Instead, it exposed reality. And reality doesn't negotiate. It waits quietly until someone asks the wrong question out loud. The HOA board tried to regain control, but the damage was already done. Emergency meetings stretched late into the night, filled with nervous voices and shifting blame. Karen claimed she had relied on old plans, insisting no one could expect her to know the exact boundaries. The board listened, but their trust was gone. The survey results sat on the table like a silent judge. Mark was asked what he wanted. He answered simply.
He wanted fairness. He didn't demand revenge, only resolution. His calm response unsettled them more than anger ever could.
The board voted to suspend Karen's authority until the issue was resolved. She stormed out, shocked that the rules she enforced so strictly were now turned against her. Outside, neighbors gathered around Mark, some apologizing, others admitting they had believed Karen without question. He nodded, accepting their words without bitterness. The fence still stood where it always had. The land still belonged to him. As night fell, Karen sat alone in her house, realizing the survey she demanded had stripped her of control. What she thought was a weapon had become a mirror. And she didn't like what it showed. The next step would decide everything. Lawyers became regular visitors. Karen explored every option, hoping for a loophole, a technicality, anything that could undo the survey. Each attempt failed. The boundaries were clear. The record undeniable. Buying the land was expensive. Altering the house was worse. Selling meant public admission of error. Mark received an offer to sell the portion of land beneath her house. He considered it carefully. The price was fair, but the principle mattered more. He countered with conditions that protected his remaining property and ensured transparency. Karen hesitated. Pride battled practicality. The HOA board urged her to accept. They needed the issue resolved to restore stability. Eventually, she agreed, signing papers with shaking hands. The transaction transferred ownership of that portion of land, but not the narrative. Everyone knew how it happened. Karen resigned shortly after. No farewell speech. No explanation. Just a brief email citing personal reasons. The neighborhood felt lighter. Rules softened. Conversations returned. Mark updated his records and restored his fence, now symbolic rather than defensive. The land dispute was over, but the lesson remained. Authority without humility invites collapse. And sometimes, the quietest neighbor holds the strongest ground. Months passed, and the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. A different HOA president took over, focused on cooperation instead of control. Meetings became shorter, calmer, and more respectful. The story of the survey lingered, shared as a cautionary tale rather than gossip. Karen's house stood unchanged, but its meaning had shifted. It was no longer a symbol of authority. It was a reminder. Mark noticed how often people paused when walking past his fence, as if remembering how quickly assumptions can fall apart. He never brought it up. He didn't need to. The land spoke for itself. He planted a small garden along the boundary, not to mark territory, but to bring life back to a place once filled with tension. Neighbors complimented it. Some even helped. One evening, Mark found the old survey flags tucked away in his garage. He considered throwing them out, then decided to keep them. Not as trophies, but as proof that truth doesn't need volume to win. It only needs patience and clarity. The dispute changed him, but gently. He trusted his instincts more now. And he understood that fairness isn't about winning arguments. It's about letting facts stand tall, even when they make others uncomfortable. On a quiet morning, Mark stood near the fence, coffee in hand, watching sunlight fall evenly across both properties. The lines were clear now, respected by everyone. The tension that once filled the air had dissolved into something calmer, almost grateful. The HOA operated differently. Surveys were double-checked. Claims were verified. Authority was questioned thoughtfully, not blindly followed. The neighborhood felt more human, less rigid. All because one demand backfired. Mark returned the original documents to their folder, sliding it into a drawer where they would rest undisturbed. He hoped never to need them again. The land was secure. The truth accepted. Karen was rarely mentioned now. Her story faded, replaced by quieter conversations and shared respect. What remained was the lesson she never intended to teach. Power should never fear verification. And those who demand proof should be ready to face it. Mark smiled slightly, not from victory, but from closure. The survey had redrawn more than property lines. It reshaped trust, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.